Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're here again to take a complex subject, strip it down to the essentials, and give you that core knowledge directly.
Exactly. And today we're diving into, well, a giant of the music world, the Berliner Philharmoniker, the Berlin Philharmonic.
We're looking at their incredible 140-year journey. It's a story packed with musical genius, yes, but also political upheaval, some really revolutionary ideas about governance, and quite a bit of surprising innovation, too.
It really is. This isn't just about a top-tier orchestra. It's a huge cultural institution that, acts almost like a mirror to German history. It's weathered empires, world wars, the division of Berlin during the Cold War, and now this massive shift into the digital age.
So our mission today is to get to the why behind it all. Why does this orchestra hold such a unique, almost mythical place in music history?
We'll trace it right from the beginning, which involves a rather bizarre dispute about travel, believe it or not, all the way to its current status as this democratic, self-governing global digital force.
And we've got some genuinely surprising stories lined up, like that fourth-class train ticket that kicked things off.
Right. And the deep, often difficult legacies of conductors like Furtwängler and Karajan.
Plus, the radical move towards democracy within the arts after 1989, and how they basically invented their own streaming service way ahead of the curve.
It's quite a tale. Remember, they were founded back in Berlin, 1882. And today, that name, Berliner Philharmoniker, it just means musical excellence worldwide. It's got that distinctive sound, that incredible musicianship.
Okay, let's start with that origin story. Because as you said, it's not exactly what you'd picture for a world-class orchestra. You'd think, lofty artistic ideals.
Not quite. It really boils down to a labor dispute. A pretty serious one, actually.
So the orchestra starts in 1882. Its first name was the Frühe Bilsche Kapelle.
That's right, the former Bills' band. Because it was literally a group of musicians who broke away from their conductor, Benjamin Bills.
And the reason? The final straw.
It was about a concert tour to Warsaw. Bills planned for the musicians, 54 of them, to travel in a fourth-class train carriage.
Fourth class? What did that even mean back then?
Basically, think cargo. Minimal comfort, maybe no seats, just not appropriate for professional artists making a long journey. It was seen as a deep sign of disrespect.
So it wasn't just the discomfort, it was the principle.
Absolutely. It was a demand for basic professional respect. And that demand led to this revolutionary split. These musicians pooled their resources, renamed themselves, and got organized very quickly. Hermann Wolf came in to handle the finances.
Smart move. Get the business side sorted.
Definitely. And they got a conductor, Ludwig von Brenner, to lead them initially from 82 to 87.
But that initial organization set them up for a pretty rapid ascent, didn't it? By 1887, they managed to hire Hans von Bülow.
Yeah, and Bülow was already a massive figure, one of the most famous pianists of the time, and he'd led the renowned Mining and Court Orchestra. Getting him was a huge coup.
So he brought instant credibility.
He did. But it wasn't just him. The management, Wolf in particular, was incredibly good at attracting everyone who mattered in European music at the time.
Right, the guest conductors and composers.
Exactly. Within just a few years, you have people like Hans Richter, Felix von Weingartner, Richard Strauss, Gustav Mahler, even Brahms and Grieg conducting their own works.
That's an astonishing lineup for such a young orchestra.
It really cemented their international standing almost immediately. They had this incredible gravitational pull.
And here's something that maybe hints at a slightly more forward-thinking side even back then. In 1887, a woman conducted the orchestra.
Yes, Mary Worm, pianist and composer. She became the very first woman to conduct them, which, for that era, was quite something. A genuine milestone.
It really was. Now, despite all this star power and rapid success, you mentioned something about their actual size early on.
Well, yeah, if you look at the programs from that time, they only had 46 string players listed.
Okay, 46 strings. Why does that number matter? Put that in context for us.
Well, the big dominant orchestral sound back then, especially influenced by Wagner, was aiming for something much bigger. Wagner's ideal was around 64 strings.
So quite a difference.
A significant difference in terms of sheer sonic weight and texture. It means the early BPO probably had a leaner, maybe more agile sound than some of the huge late Romantic orchestras.
Interesting. So they had to rely more on precision and blend, perhaps, rather than just overwhelming volume?
Exactly. Quality over sheer quantity, you could say. They built their power through exceptional musicianship.
Makes sense. And this initial phase, this first burst of establishing themselves, kind of wraps up with Arthur Nikisch, right?
Mm-hmm.
He led them from 1895 all the way to 1922.
Yes, Nikisch guided them through a long, crucial period right up to the Weimar Republic era, a time of great artistic ferment, but also growing instability.
Okay, so Nikisch's era ends, and that brings us to Wilhelm Furtwängler. His time as chief conductor starting in 1922 really defined the orchestra's sound, but it also coincided with, well, Germany's darkest chapter.
It's an incredibly complex period. Furtwängler was undeniably a musical giant. Under him, the BPO became the benchmark for the core Austro-Germanic repertoire: Beethoven, Brahms, Bruckner, Strauss, Wagner.
What does that sound like?
Deeply serious, philosophical, often quite weighty and intensely emotional. Technically brilliant, of course, but with this profound, almost spiritual depth. That sound, that approach still echoes in the orchestra today, I think.
But pursuing that high art happened against the backdrop of the Nazi regime. The orchestra kept playing throughout World War II.
Yes, they did. As a major cultural institution, they were, kept going. And this is where it gets ethically incredibly complicated, and we have to be impartial in reporting what the sources say.
Because Furtwängler himself wasn't necessarily aligned with the regime.
There's evidence he actively disliked the Nazis and tried to protect Jewish musicians within the orchestra and beyond. But at the same time, he stayed. He conducted. He allowed the orchestra, and by extension himself, to be used by the regime.
That tension seems impossible to resolve.
It was. And the most infamous example, the one that always comes up, is the concert on April 20th, 1942, Hitler's birthday. Furtwängler conducted Beethoven's Ninth Symphony.
Beethoven's Ninth.
Yeah.
The Ode to Joy for Hitler's birthday.
The symbolism is just chilling. And after the performance, there are photos, recordings. Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, walks up and shakes Furtwängler's hand on stage.
That image alone.
It was incredibly damaging after the war. Regardless of Furtwängler's private views or actions, that public association was seen as deeply compromising. The regime was essentially co-opting Germany's highest cultural achievements for its own ends.
Did Furtwängler stay until the very end of the war?
Almost. By January 1945, things were closing in. The Gestapo was apparently investigating him. The Soviets were advancing on Berlin. He managed to flee to Switzerland.
And the orchestra itself in those final chaotic months.
Leo Borchardt took over briefly. He'd actually been dismissed earlier by the Nazis, so his return was significant. But the final wartime concert, April 12th, 1945.
It sounds like something out of a nightmare.
What? The program ended with the immolation scene from Wagner's Götterdämmerung, The Twilight of the Gods, as the city was literally crumbling around them.
The symbolism again.
Exactly. And the sources mention this horrifying detail. Hitler Youth members were apparently in the audience handing out cyanide pills for those who preferred that to capture.
Unimaginable.
Yeah.
You'd think the orchestra would cease to exist after that.
But it didn't. Their main hall, the Old Philharmony, had been bombed and destroyed back in January 44. But the orchestra itself was seen as too important. Remarkably, the Soviet occupation authorities reopened it very quickly on May 26, 1945.
So continuity, even amidst total devastation.
Yes, but the instability wasn't over. Borchardt, who had taken over, was then tragically killed later in 1945, accidentally shot by American soldiers in a misunderstanding in Allied-occupied Berlin.
Good grief, what a chaotic time.
It truly was.
Right.
So Sergei Celibidache, another fascinating conductor, stepped into the breach. He led the orchestra from 1945 until 1952. This eventually allowed for Furtwängler's return after his denazification process.
But Furtwängler's return was brief.
Yes, he came back in 52, but died just 2 years later in 1954. So the orchestra, having survived the war and its immediate aftermath, was again looking for strong, stable leadership. Hashtag 2.2, the Karajan Empire, 1955-1989.
Right. And this search for stability leads us to, well, arguably the most famous conductor of the 20th century, Herbert von Karajan. His election in 1955 kicked off a whole new era.
Oh, absolutely. The Karajan Empire, as it's often called, he was chief conductor for an incredible length of time until 1989. And he didn't just lead the orchestra, he transformed its entire global presence and, frankly, its business model.
How so? What was his big impact?
Karajan was a brilliant musician, of course, inheriting and refining that powerful, polished sound, but he was also a master strategist and, very interested in technology and media.
Recordings?
Exactly. He understood the power of recordings like no one before him. The orchestra toured extensively, yes, but the sheer volume of recordings they made, mostly with Deutsche Grammophon, was staggering.
He was known for being obsessed with the technical side of recording, wasn't he?
Completely. He pushed the boundaries of recording technology, embracing stereo early on, then digital. He wanted to capture the perfect BPO sound in the studio. And those recordings became the global standard. They sold millions. The BPO became arguably the most famous orchestra in the world, largely because of Karajan's recording legacy.
So massive fame, technological innovation. But it wasn't all smooth sailing internally, was it? Particularly around gender representation.
No, it wasn't. The orchestra did hire its first female musician in 1982, a violinist named Madeline Caruso. That was the step. But then came a major controversy later that same year.
This involved Sabine Meyer.
Yes. Karajan wanted to hire Sabine Meyer, a brilliant clarinetist. She would have been the first female wind player. Karajan championed her.
But the orchestra resisted.
Resisted is putting it mildly. The musicians actually held a formal vote on whether to admit her permanently after her trial period. And despite Karajan's very public backing, he was at the peak of his power. The orchestra voted overwhelmingly against her.
What was the vote count?
The sources say 73-4, a stunning rejection. Meyer subsequently left the orchestra.
Wow. Even Karajan couldn't force their hand on that.
Exactly. It caused a huge public scandal and really exposed the deep-seated conservatism within the orchestra's ranks at the time. It also showed something crucial.
Which was?
That even under a figure as dominant as Karajan, the musicians themselves held significant power and a strong sense of, well, self-determination. That independence, that willingness to push back, it's actually a recurring theme.
From the train ticket revolt onwards.
Precisely. It foreshadows the move towards self-governance later on. Karajan eventually resigned in April 1989, just a few months before the Berlin Wall came down, ending this monumental, globally dominant, technologically pioneering era.
So Karajan leaves right as Berlin, and indeed the world, is on the cusp of enormous change. The fall of the Berlin Wall in November '89. And the orchestra needs a new leader.
And the way they chose the next conductor, Claudio Abbado, really reflected that new era of German reunification and democratic spirit.
Yeah.
Well, the orchestra voted for Abbado. It was seen as the first truly democratic election by the musicians in the post-wall era. A conscious move away from the sort of autocratic style associated with conductors like Karajan.
Interesting. And Abbado himself brought a different artistic approach too, didn't he?
Yes, very much so. While Karajan had doubled down on that core Austro-Germanic repertoire, Abbado made a deliberate effort to broaden things. He programmed much more 20th century music, contemporary works, commissioned new pieces.
It was pushing the orchestra beyond its traditional comfort zone.
Exactly. Keeping it relevant, engaging with modern music in a way Karajan hadn't emphasized as much. It was a necessary evolution, I think.
But this period, the post-unification 90s, was also tough financially for Berlin, wasn't it? Did that affect the orchestra?
Oh, definitely. The city of Berlin faced huge budget pressures after reunification, trying to integrate East and West, and a major cultural institution like the BPO, which relied heavily on state subsidies, felt that squeeze. There were significant financial problems during Abbado's tenure.
That highlights the vulnerability of being reliant on state funding.
It certainly does. But despite those pressures, Abbado's commitment to new music left a lasting legacy. The orchestra's academy later established the Claudio Abbado Composition Prize in 2006, honoring that focus. Hashtag 3.2, the Rattle Transformation, 2002-2018.
Okay, so Abbado navigates these artistic expansions and financial headwinds. Then comes Sir Simon Rattle, elected in 1999, taking over in 2002. And he instigated a really fundamental change, didn't he?
He really did. This is a key moment for understanding the modern BPO. Rattle basically laid down a condition before he would sign his contract.
Which was?
He insisted that the orchestra had to change its legal status. It needed to become a self-governing public foundation, a Stiftung öffentlichen Rechts.
A self-governing public foundation. What did that mean, practically?
It meant independence, real independence. Control over their own artistic direction, yes, but crucially, control over their own finances. They would manage their own endowment, generate their own revenue, make their own strategic decisions.
So breaking free from relying solely on the city of Berlin's budget cycles.
Exactly. It required a change in state law, which was actually passed in 2001. This move fundamentally secured the orchestra's future, insulated it from political budget cuts, and importantly, formally put the power in the hands of the musicians and their management. It was the ultimate realization of that independent streak they'd always had.
That's a massive structural shift, almost revolutionary for an orchestra of that scale.
It truly was. And Rattle used that newfound autonomy not just for stability, but also to push the orchestra in new directions, particularly towards community engagement.
Like the Rhythm Is It project.
That's the most famous example. Yeah. Getting 250 kids from Berlin public schools, many from underprivileged backgrounds, to dance Stravinsky's Rite of Spring with the orchestra playing live.
An incredibly ambitious project.
Hugely ambitious. And the documentary film about it won awards and really showed a different side of the BPO connecting with the wider community, using music as a social force. It really resonated.
And the musicians clearly valued his leadership.
Yeah, it seems so. They voted in 2008 to extend his contract, keeping him there until 2018, although his departure was announced a bit earlier in 2013. That stability was important.
You mentioned management earlier. How does the administrative leadership work alongside the chief conductor?
It's a crucial partnership. The role of the general manager, or Intendantin, is key in the German system. They run the whole operation, finance, marketing, planning, working closely with the artistic director.
And there's been some continuity